Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Fu, and I'm coming here from the American Museum of Natural History across the park. So yeah, this year we opened a new permanent exhibit in the Hall of Planet Earth that focuses on climate change, and I'll be talking about that today. Yeah, I want to focus a little more on the process, which might be of interest, but it'll try to cover a lot. At the museum, I'm a data visualization artist. I work within the science visualization group, which is very appropriate for this setting, I guess. I'll have all the links available on this link, but this link currently doesn't work, so it'll work by tomorrow probably. Kind of as a bit of a background for myself, my background is a bit in computer science and visual art. I've been very interested in different ways of visualizing data in ways in which we might not expect to experience data visualization. Some prior work I did, and this is just personal work on the side, kind of turning EEG data into sound. So this is a patient who has epilepsy, so it kind of takes you through the data. So the data kind of manipulates the song. So this wasn't really made for like a research. It wasn't made for research. It was more of a creative expression of the data. But yeah, it is in kind of this gray area, no pun intended, of my job as a data scientist versus an artist, where I shouldn't really bias the listener or the viewer as a data scientist, but as an artist, I want to make you feel a certain way. I want you to experience something in a very particular way, and this kind of music in particular kind of can manipulate feeling. In a way that visualization doesn't do as clearly. I did things like I was inspired by a John Cage composition where he kind of put a musical staff over a star map. So I created this interactive where you could kind of just move the sky and it'll play whatever the stars are in that particular part of the sky. I've also become interested in kind of slow visualization that happens over time, and kind of this passive and active interaction of data. I created this coloring book that brings you through different climate visualizations related to climate change. This is CO2 emissions, and it's a visualization that would kind of happen over like 30 minutes or something. And it's almost kind of a meditation on the data, and it kind of reveals itself over time, and kind of makes you sit down and kind of think about what the underlying representations of the data is and its implications on people and stuff like that. It also has this physical quality to it, where your hand literally starts hurting over time, so it's kind of interactive in that way. And also using time more explicitly as a way to experience the data. This is an activity where you have to try to color in as many football fields as you can in a minute, because that's about how much forests are being destroyed per minute, net loss of forests. So yeah, it's kind of using the activity of coloring. Incidentally, this is kind of what brought me to the museum. This is a view of the Hall of Planet of Earth that was, it opened in the late 90s, and it's a very beautiful hall if you haven't been there. It's very heavily specimen based, so the museum has a practice of incorporating a lot of physical specimens, especially in the physical sciences, in the exhibits, and in this case you can touch pretty much everything. Yeah, it's kind of like an old school interactivity / visualization, because a lot of this material has embedded data on it, yeah, this is the section of the hall that talks about the ocean and atmosphere of the planet, and this is what we put most of our resources in to renovate. So this particular area didn't really have a lot of traffic. Also, as an institution, we wanted to really tackle this subject of climate change, which is a really big kind of issue of our time. And we had to think about what is the appropriate medium and kind of interactivity for this, especially in a hall that is kind of built on specimens and kind of just putting the evidence in front of the visitors. So there is kind of like the original data visualization of like tree rings, corals. We have coral cores. Ice core, which they did attempt to get a real ice core in there, but they had some refrigeration issues. So this was all here originally, and all those specimens are still there. This was kind of one area that tried to talk about the ocean and atmosphere system, circulation. This area is where we kind of wanted to just focus on climate change. On the label deck, this is kind of like the poster child of why we needed this update, or part of the reason why is that this hall was built in the 90s, so any data that they have on global warming or CO2 concentration ends abruptly in 1998 or in this case 96. And the science hasn't really changed as much, but the ways in which we communicate the subject has definitely evolved. There's a lot of nuance and complex research has been done on the impacts and consequences, as well as kind of the ways in which we collect data. And this kind of got us thinking about how there isn't really one specimen that you can put in the hall that can really represent this really big problem or this really big system of the climate. It's hard to kind of put something that happens globally and over long periods of time. And so we wanted to really focus on kind of how scientists understand the climate, and a lot of that has to do with data collection, data visualization. And that was kind of our starting point, and that's kind of been our focus on using data as a specimen that we can kind of put in front of the audience and have them be able to interact with it and connect with it. I'll briefly kind of talk about the kind of the structure internally in the institution of how we developed this project. There was three primary departments that worked on this: the science department, the exhibition department, and the education department. This is actually the first time this type of collaboration happened. Typically, the exhibitions department would work with the science department to build these things. I'm actually part of the education department, and we kind of collaborate very closely, for better or worse. This was kind of like a data viz that I kind of just did, kind of in a very free way. But these are kind of the different responsibilities and kind of tasks that in yellow were the ones that are more defined, whereas everything else was it was very organic and we kind of learned as we go. I could probably do a whole presentation on just the internal process of this, which is very fascinating. So this is an early kind of sketch of what we wanted to build. So it's this 36-foot wall of screens. So it's all completely digital, except for on the bottom here, we have like physical controls that kind of manipulate what you see on the screen. So there is a bit of physicality there. And again, we really want to kind of just put the data on display, and then also this other challenge of the data is always changing, right? So we want to be able to have it almost as a living exhibit that constantly updates as it gets new data and new ways in which we interpret the data and different contexts and things like current events. I mean, there's tons of things we could talk about wildfires, the hurricane season, things like that. This is another scale model of kind of what we're looking at. I'll briefly kind of talk about, we had an interesting kind of process issue of, the wall itself wouldn't be built until much later in the process. So we had to develop all this content for this 36-foot giant wall of screens. So one of the questions was, how are we going to prototype, something like that? Luckily, in my group, we had a. Turn the line a little bit. In my group, the science visualization group, we use a combination of kind of new media and new technology like AR and VR to find new ways and appropriate ways to incorporate this type of technology into the museum. It's a kind of difficult thing because, I mean, for myself, I just love the physical exhibits and the physical objects. So when is it appropriate to use things like this is something that we think about a lot. But luckily, given that expertise, one of my colleagues, or a couple of my colleagues, basically just rebuilt the hall in VR, which is kind of crazy. This is just kind of like a, on the left is the original hall, and on the right it's the VR version. And yeah, it was incredible. We were able to kind of prototype this space and try out different content in different parts of the hall. We even had fake people walk around. It was really a little disturbing. Again, I could kind of do a whole presentation on this, but there's a lot of things that worked, a lot of things that didn't, but ultimately it was definitely something that we learned a lot from, and we could think about moving forward how we could use this in our process. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of the content, especially in that big part of the screen. So the upper 3/4 of the screen, we wanted to show really big visualizations. On the bottom part, which I'll talk about a little later, is all where you could dive deeper and have interactivity. This was kind of like an early sketch of how long it would take for meltwater from the Greenland ice sheets, how quickly it would fill up the Empire State Building, which is 2 minutes. Kind of using the scale of the space. Another thing that we tried was kind of visualizing CO2 emissions from fossil fuels over time. So each, you might not be able to see it on this screen, but each dot represents a certain, I think metric ton of CO2 over time. So this screen slowly fills up as we progress over time. A lot of these were a bit challenging to kind of read, and it kind of required you to interpret the data and kind of experience it over a particular amount of time, which kind of given the space, it was difficult to do. We also tried kind of more abstract, kind of artistic representations of climate data. But I think we landed on, again, kind of going back to this original idea of how can we just put the data on display, or the climate as we understand it on display. So that this is just this was last year's hurricane season. And again, it's kind of matched with a very big, clear message, but some annotation, but it isn't something that you necessarily have to kind of watch in a linear way. You can kind of point at different events or something like that, or connect to different things. It's a very nonlinear experience, which is kind of how people experience things with specimens in the hall. Similarly, things with just having the Antarctica ice sheet, where you can kind of just look at the incredible resolution of the data. And again, this is 36 feet wide, so you could actually go up and kind of really look at the fine detail of the data. This is just kind of the NASA's lights at night. And again, this is something that you could kind of see people coming from all over the world and just connecting to, oh yeah, that's where we're from. And kind of just looking around kind of the map and kind of connecting to it. And this is really taking advantage of the incredible resolution of data that NASA has publicly available. I kind of did a quick calculation and visualization of that. So if all that data was this is kind of what the data would look like in its kind of one-to-one resolution on a standard screen. So you can see that kind of like a little person there for scale. But that's how like massive the data is, which is something that you can't really take advantage of on a desktop computer or something like that. So that's why we went in this direction to kind of take advantage of this really giant canvas where you can't really experience this data like this. So yeah, I could talk a bit about kind of this bottom part here. So this the bottom row of screens is kind of where we had allowed visitors to kind of dive deeper into the subject, and everything is interactive with physical controls. We had a whole prototype process, so I kind of used kind of these very modular physical controls and just brought a screen around the museum and tried to have people use it and get things from. This is kind of just a sketch of kind of the three sections that we kind of broke three sections that we broke the interactives into. So we wanted to look at wanted the visitors to explore how the climate works. So looking at the climate system, the greenhouse effect, all those things. We wanted them to, in this middle section, kind of explore the evidence, and this was very much data-based interactives, very data-heavy, which I'll show you in a second. And this third section is all about consequences, primarily to us, but as well as ecosystems. Again, like a lot of the interactives. And in this case, there's a horizontal and vertical slider. There's a virtual slider on the left that you can see what's happening. But this is just kind of exploring how heat travels through the planet. And again, this is kind of like a guided exploration where we kind of just put the data there for them to explore. But some messages pop up as you kind of look at the data. So it's kind of this. This way of having them to kind of come to specific conclusions as they're playing with the data. Okay. I'm going to try to pull the actual interactive up. So this one is kind of the basic temperature graph that you might be familiar with. It's looking at temperature anomaly over time. We have two sliders, one vertical and one horizontal. The vertical one allows you to kind of zoom in and out, change the time scale that you're looking at. So the main lesson here is just kind of looking at short-term noise, weather versus climate, and long-term trends. Myself, I'm very interested in using different senses to kind of reinforce the lesson. So this idea of kind of zooming in, you can scrub the horizontal one. Let me turn up the sound. So you can literally hear the short-term noise versus, when you kind of zoom out to the 140-year record, you could hear the very clear trend over time. So, it's kind of this very, very basic interactivity, but hopefully kind of the multimodal aspect reinforces it. Let's see, PowerPoint. How did I get back? Did I exit? Oh, there you go. Okay. So yeah, this one kind of explores geotemporal data. So similarly with the horizontal bar, you're moving through time, but you're seeing kind of the spatial temperature anomaly that on the globe on the left, and as you kind of move the vertical slider, you kind of change what region you're looking at. So you kind of see how temperatures are warming in an accelerated rate as you go more to the higher latitudes. And again, kind of on the subject of kind of showing the evidence, just a very basic kind of before and after, using satellite imagery, which is something that we think of as another form of just data visualization or data, to kind of convey different experience ideas and experiences. So yeah, all this is kind of available at the museum in the Hall of Planet Earth. It's a permanent exhibit, so it should be there at least for the next 20 years or so. Yeah, it's kind of built to be constantly updated and developed on. That part of the funding was to continue to work on this, and we built it in a way in which, because it was done in-house, we can continue to improve it and kind of make sure it's supported. The way I built it was using web technologies. So it's very easy to kind of port it to different platforms. This is kind of like a web interface that I have available, which it has the actual label decks, has all the interactives that you could kind of use in your browser. But we're thinking of other ways in which we could kind of port it over, and it's very modular. So we're already talking to other museums to kind of incorporate pieces of it, yeah, everything is also publicly available, open source, and all the data that we used is also open data from the government, primarily NASA and NOAA, and everything is documented and all that. So yeah, again, it'll all be available on those links once this is working. But yeah, that's it.